They said no gun could ever break them. No weapon in existence could breach their shields. No force could make them kneel. For centuries, the galaxy believed it. The core dominion, an empire so vast it stretched across hundreds of star systems, had ruled unchallenged. Their fleets were massive, their armor impenetrable, and their pride unmatched. Planets surrendered before a single shot was fired. Entire civilizations bowed in silence, and the words, "Resistance is futile," became the law of the stars. But that was before they met humanity. Before they learned that the quiet blue world on the edge of the Milky Way was home to creatures that refused to kneel, creatures who turned fear into fuel and failure into invention. When the core came to Earth, they didn't come with diplomacy. They came to conquer. Their ships darkened the sky, their weapons burned through our cities, and their voices echoed with arrogance as they broadcast across every frequency. "No gun in your primitive arsenal can harm us." They were right at first. Our tanks shattered, our missiles fizzled against their energy shields, and our armies were reduced to dust. But what the core never understood was that humans don't stop when the odds are impossible. They adapt, they rebuild, they learn. The first year was a nightmare. Billions were lost. The survivors scattered underground, hiding in the ruins of what used to be great nations. Governments collapsed, communications failed, and for a while, humanity was nothing more than whispers in the dark. The core called it peace. But for us, it was the beginning of something new. Underground, in hidden labs and forgotten bunkers, scientists, engineers, and soldiers gathered. They didn't dream of surrender. They dreamed of revenge. At first, the resistance didn't have much. Old tools, broken machines, fragments of alien tech salvaged from battlefields. But those fragments were enough. Because when humans looked at alien metal, they didn't just see defeat, they saw potential. They took what little they had and began to build something the galaxy had never seen before. They didn't want one weapon. They wanted 10. 10 guns that could change everything. 10 weapons powerful enough to tear through the impossible. Each weapon was unique. The first was forged from melted tank armor and powered by a stolen alien reactor core. It was crude, unstable, and dangerous. But when fired, it pierced the unpierceable. The second was smaller, faster, built to be carried by one soldier. It fired condensed plasma rounds that could melt through a core warship's hull. The others grew stranger, smarter, deadlier. By the time the 10th was completed, humanity had built not just guns, but symbols. Proof that they could stand against a galaxy that had already written them off as extinct. But weapons alone weren't enough. They needed people willing to use them, people who had lost everything but their will to fight. They came from every corner of the broken earth. Soldiers, engineers, pilots, even farmers and miners who had watched their families burn. They weren't heroes, they were survivors, bound by one purpose, to make the galaxy remember the name of their homeworld. When the resistance finally emerged from hiding, the galaxy laughed. The core saw 10 small ships armed with 10 strange weapons and called it a final act of desperation. They expected to wipe us out again, to prove that no gun could ever break their rule. But the first shot fired changed everything. The sky lit up as one of the new weapons roared to life, a beam so bright it turned night into day. It struck a core flagship head-on, and the impossible happened. The shield cracked, not shattered completely, but enough to leave a scar, enough to make the invincible bleed. The core faltered for the first time in their empire's history. Their fleets pulled back in confusion, their leaders demanded answers, and the galaxy, watching from the shadows, began to whisper. Who were these humans? How did a dying world build what the greatest empires could not? It was the beginning of something bigger than a war. It was the start of a legend. But legends come at a cost. Every victory drained the resistance. Every battle meant another life lost. Each gun required power no reactor could sustain for long. To fire them was to risk everything, to burn out the machines and sometimes the people who used them. Yet even knowing that, the humans kept fighting. Because it wasn't about survival anymore. It was about pride. About proving that no empire, no matter how ancient or powerful, could crush the human spirit. The core responded with fury. Entire worlds were turned to ash as they hunted for Earth's survivors. But humanity had learned to vanish, to strike from the shadows and disappear before the enemy could react. The galaxy began to see their war as madness, a futile rebellion led by a dying species. Yet deep down, every world that had once bowed to the core began to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the unbreakable could be broken after all. Rumors spread of a coming battle, a final confrontation that would decide everything. The core gathered their grand armada, a force so massive it blotted out the stars. Humanity prepared their last stand. 10 ships, 10 guns, 1 planet left to defend. The leaders of the resistance knew they couldn't win through numbers, only through heart. The plan was simple. Strike first, strike hard, and make the galaxy remember who started it. The night before the battle, the survivors gathered in silence. There was no music, no speeches, just quiet determination. They looked at the stars and saw not enemies, but a challenge. Somewhere up there, billions of beings believed the war was already decided. But humanity had never cared about what others believed. When dawn came, the guns roared once more. The first blast tore through the void, the second followed, and soon the sky was alive with light. For every ship that fell, 2 more replaced it, but the humans didn't stop. The 10th weapon, the most powerful of them all, was still charging, its core glowing brighter with every heartbeat. The enemy drew closer, surrounding them, believing victory was certain. And then, silence. In that still moment before everything erupted, one thought crossed every human mind: that this was not the end. This was the beginning of the moment the galaxy would finally understand what it meant to challenge Earth. They said no gun could break them. The galaxy failed to prove it wrong. Humanity built 10 that worked. And as the final weapon charged, its light reflecting in the dark, the question hung in the air. Would it save them or end them all? The answer would come next. The silence didn't last long. A low hum began to rise from deep within the ship's hull, a vibration that rattled every bolt and shook through every bone. The 10th weapon was alive, its core burning hotter than it ever had before. Every screen flickered as power was rerouted, every alarm screamed in warning, but no one dared shut it down. This was what they had built it for, this one moment where all of humanity's pain, loss, and defiance would come together into a single shot that could change the course of the galaxy. But even as the light grew brighter, doubts lingered. The commander of the resistance fleet stood at the edge of the command deck, staring at the endless wall of enemy ships filling the stars ahead. There were so many that space itself seemed to bend around them. Each ship was armed with enough firepower to wipe out continents, and the humans had only 10. 10 ships, 10 weapons, and 1 chance. The weight of that reality pressed heavily on everyone's mind, but no one spoke of retreat. The thought didn't exist anymore. Across the fleet, soldiers moved with quiet determination. Many were not trained warriors. They were mechanics, scientists, or miners who had picked up weapons out of necessity. The faces under the helmets were tired, aged beyond their years, but their eyes still burned with the same fire that had carried humanity through every dark age. They were the last generation of fighters from Earth, the last who had seen the world before it fell. And tonight, they were ready to make sure it wasn't forgotten. In the engineering bay of the flagship, the heart of the 10th weapon pulsed like a living thing. The engineers moved quickly, adjusting coolant lines, monitoring the reactor's rising temperature, whispering prayers they hadn't spoken in years. One of them, a woman whose hands had been burned from countless repairs, stared at the growing energy field with a strange mix of fear and pride. She had helped design this weapon, built it from scraps of alien technology and fragments of fallen ships. She knew what it could do, but she also knew what it could cost. Every time the weapon fired, it consumed a piece of itself, a piece of the ship. And maybe this time, it would consume them all. On the communications deck, signals crackled through the static. The Corps were broadcasting again, their deep mechanical voices echoing through every channel. They spoke of surrender, of mercy, of promises that meant nothing. It was the same speech they had given to 100 other worlds before they burned them. But humanity didn't reply. They didn't need to. Their silence was louder than any words. Far from the front lines, hidden colonies across the shattered remains of Earth listened to the faint transmissions of the resistance fleet. In underground shelters, families huddled together, watching flickering screens that showed the dark expanse of the battlefield. Children too young to remember the old world whispered stories of the 10 guns, stories that sounded more like legends than truth. Some believed the fleet would win. Others just prayed that the galaxy would finally remember what Earth once was. The background of this war was carved in loss. It hadn't started with a declaration or a misunderstanding. It started the day humanity reached beyond its borders. The Corps had been watching for centuries, waiting. They had seen humans rise from primitive beginnings, seen them send probes across the stars, seen them build colonies on distant moons. And they had decided early on that humans were dangerous, not because of their strength, but because of their unpredictability. When the first human expedition stumbled into core space, the encounter was peaceful for a moment. Then something went wrong. A misunderstanding, an accident, or maybe something worse. What mattered was that a single ship's explosion became the spark that ignited the war. At first, the Corps didn't even consider it a war. To them, it was a cleansing. One swift strike to erase a small, rebellious species before it could spread too far. But they underestimated the human spirit. Every attack only hardened the survivors. Every city destroyed became a rallying cry. Humanity had always been a race that thrived under pressure, and for the first time, the entire planet stood together. Old rivalries disappeared. Flags no longer mattered. There was only one cause left: to fight back. It took years of hiding, scavenging, and sacrifice to build the 10 guns. Each one was a masterpiece of desperation and brilliance. They were powered by hybrid cores, half human, half alien design. Some ran on stolen technology, others on theories that shouldn't have worked at all. The galaxy would later call them impossible weapons. But for the engineers who built them, they were simply the next step of evolution. Yet even among humanity, there were doubts. Some believed the war could never be won, that survival should come before revenge. Others thought the weapons were too dangerous, that they could destroy not just the enemy, but everything. But the resistance leaders believed otherwise. They believed the only way to stop the Corps was to make them afraid, to show them something beyond logic, something they couldn't calculate or predict. That belief became the core of the 10th weapon, the Breaker. Unlike the others, it wasn't built to destroy ships. It was built to break energy itself. A weapon designed to collapse shield harmonics, unravel power fields, and turn the laws of physics into chaos. The galaxy said it couldn't be done. But humanity had never cared much for what the galaxy said. Now, on the eve of the final battle, the Breaker was ready. Its charge filled the entire ship with light, a deep blue glow that shimmered across the metal walls. Outside, the Corps fleet moved closer, their formation flawless, their confidence unshaken. They had never lost a war. They didn't believe they could. To them, this was just another extermination. But the humans had something the Corps would never understand: hope mixed with fury. It wasn't logical. It wasn't efficient. But it was powerful. It was the same force that had carried them through every extinction, every disaster, every moment when survival seemed impossible. And as the light of the Breaker reached its peak, that force burned brighter than any star. Across the fleet, the soldiers waited for the command. Some clutched small tokens from home, a photo, a charm, a fragment of Earth's soil. Others simply closed their eyes, whispering the same words passed through the generations. For Earth. Then came the signal, a single tone that echoed through every channel. The fleet moved as one, engines roaring to life, weapons charging. The Corps responded instantly, their ships unleashing waves of plasma fire that lit up the void. The first blasts struck, tearing through human shields and hulls, but the humans didn't stop. They fired back, not with hope of surviving, but with the will to make their mark on the stars. As the chaos grew, the breaker's light expanded until it engulfed the entire flagship. The commander gave the final order, one word, steady and calm: fire. But before the weapon unleashed its power, something unexpected happened. Every human ship received a new signal, faint but unmistakable. It wasn't from their fleet. It wasn't from Earth. It came from deep space, far beyond known sectors. A message in human code, old and distorted, repeating the same line over and over. You are not alone. No one knew where it came from. Some thought it was a trick. Others believed it was another remnant of human colonies lost years ago. But whatever it was, it changed everything. For the first time in the war, humanity realized the fight might be larger than they ever imagined. The breaker's charge reached full power, humming like a heartbeat ready to explode. The Corps fleet closed in, their weapons locking on target. The galaxy held its breath, and then, just before the light erupted, the message played one last time, clearer than before. You are not alone. And the stars themselves seemed to answer back. The moment that message echoed through the fleet, everything seemed to pause. Even with alarms screaming and enemy fire cutting through the void, that faint voice, human, distant, and full of static, felt louder than anything else. You are not alone. It was impossible. Every surviving colony had gone silent years ago. The last transmissions from Mars and Titan had faded long before the Resistance built the 10 guns. Humanity was supposed to be alone, cornered, forgotten, fighting its last stand. And yet, there it was. A voice from the dark, carrying a promise they had stopped believing in. The commander didn't know what to make of it. On one screen, the tactical display showed the Corps armada closing in, a perfect unbroken wave of destruction. On another, the signal's source flickered like a ghost, somewhere far beyond known space. If it was real, if there were others out there, then humanity wasn't fighting just for survival anymore. They were fighting for a chance to reunite. But there wasn't time to decide what it meant. The Corps weren't slowing down. Their ships fired again, energy beams slicing through the black. The humans had seconds to act. The order came fast. The breaker fired. The beam that erupted from the flagship was unlike anything ever seen before. It didn't explode. It shimmered, rippling through the void like water bending light. For a brief, silent instant, the stars seemed to distort. Then the Corps' front line flickered. Their shields failed, their energy fields collapsed, and their ships began to spiral out of control. The weapon had worked. The impossible had happened again. But the victory didn't feel like triumph. The power surge hit the flagship hard, shaking it to its core. Consoles burst, lights dimmed, and the ship's hull began to groan under the strain. The breaker's core was destabilizing. They had won the first exchange, but at a cost. Half their systems were down, and their fleet was scattered in the chaos. As the engineers scrambled to cool the core, a small team intercepted the strange signal again. This time it wasn't just a single message. It was data, coordinates, old encryption codes, and fragments of a voice log. The signal wasn't random. It was coming from human technology, decades old but still functioning. Somewhere out there, someone was alive. In the quiet after the blast, the crew gathered in the command room, arguing over what to do next. Some believed they had to follow the signal. Others said it was a trap, an illusion created by the core to lure them into a false hope. The commander listened, but didn't decide yet. The war had taught humanity that hope could be both a weapon and a weakness. Meanwhile, on the ground far below, survivors hiding in underground cities received the same faint transmission. In the darkness, their old radios flickered to life. For the first time in years, they heard something other than static. People began to whisper again, to look up at the sky and wonder if the fleet wasn't as alone as they thought. It gave them something they hadn't felt in a long time, faith, and that faith spread like wildfire. But the Corps were not blind to what had happened. On their command ship, deep within the formation, the Corps High Marshal watched the human weapon's aftermath with cold fascination. The breaker had done what no other civilization's weapon could, disrupt their shields. It was impossible, unnatural even, and that made it dangerous. The Corps had faced rebellions before, but this was different. Humanity's defiance was spreading beyond Earth's ruins, stirring unrest in other systems the Dominion controlled. The Marshal saw the danger clearly. If hope became a weapon, the Empire itself could fracture. He ordered the immediate deployment of their secret fleet, vessels built not for conquest, but for annihilation. His command was simple: find the humans and erase every trace of their existence before their message reached anyone else. Back aboard the Resistance flagship, tension grew by the hour. The breaker's reactor was unstable. If it wasn't repaired soon, it could collapse into itself. The engineers worked non-stop, using fragments of alien metal and human ingenuity to keep it alive. In one quiet corner of the ship, a young pilot studied the strange coordinates from the unknown transmission. He had grown up after the fall of Earth, hearing stories of blue oceans and green forests he had never seen. To him, the message meant more than survival. It meant belonging. He believed whoever sent it might hold the key to humanity's future. His belief soon spread to others, and small arguments turned into quiet rebellion. Some wanted to break formation and go after the signal right away. Others feared abandoning their position would doom the fleet. The commander knew the unity they'd built was starting to crack under the weight of uncertainty. Meanwhile, deep in the ship's lower decks, one of the scientists began to piece together something disturbing. The signal, though human, carried fragments of alien code, core architecture buried deep within it. It wasn't a clean message. It was like someone, or something, had rewritten it. When she tried to trace it further, her screen went black. Moments later, the power flickered across the ship again. It was almost as if the message didn't want to be decoded. Outside, the stars were no longer calm. The core fleet was reorganizing. Hundreds of their ships had fallen in the first blast, but their main force was still intact, and now they were adapting. The humans' element of surprise was gone. The next wave would be brutal. The fleet's sensors picked up massive energy signatures moving closer, something larger than the Corps had ever used before. The commander gathered the crew once more. The decision was clear. They couldn't face another direct assault. The fleet needed to retreat long enough to regroup, to repair the breaker, and to uncover the truth behind that mysterious signal. It wasn't just about hope anymore. If someone, or something, was out there manipulating human code, they had to know why. As the ships prepared for jump, the pilot secretly set his navigation toward the coordinates from the transmission. When the engines roared to life, his fighter broke formation, darting into the dark without permission. He didn't care about orders anymore. He wanted to find the truth for himself. The commander saw it too late. By the time they tried to call him back, he was gone, disappearing into the black between stars. The rest of the fleet jumped seconds later, leaving behind wreckage and silence. Far away, the pilot followed the signal deeper into space. The coordinates led him through debris fields, past derelict stations, and into a region no one had ever mapped. The stars here looked different, dimmer, colder. Then, just as his systems began to fail, he saw it, a structure floating among the ruins. It wasn't core. It wasn't human either. It was something in between. The structure pulsed faintly with blue light, the same hue as the breaker's core. The signal grew louder until it filled his cockpit. Then, without warning, his ship powered down completely. The engines died, the lights faded, and he was left drifting toward the strange object as the voice repeated one last time, "You are not alone." On the flagship, systems began to glitch again at the exact same moment. The coordinates appeared on every console, burning themselves into the data feeds. No one could explain it, but they all felt it. A pull, a connection, as if the message had been waiting for them to respond. The commander stood in silence, staring at the stars where the pilot had vanished. The war wasn't just about survival anymore. Something much larger was unfolding, something that reached beyond the fight between humans and the core. Whatever that voice was, wherever it came from, it was calling them deeper into the unknown, and they had no choice but to follow. The fleet drifted in the darkness of deep space, the stars distant and cold, the silence between transmissions heavy with unease. The coordinates from the mysterious signals still glowed on every display, burned into their systems like a whisper that wouldn't fade. No one dared delete them. No one knew if they even could. Every time someone tried, the coordinates returned, etched in brighter, as if the message itself was alive. The commander stood on the deck of the flagship, staring at the endless void ahead. Every instinct said to ignore the signal, to focus on the war, to prepare for the next core assault. But something deep down, something old and human, kept pulling at his thoughts. The message hadn't just been words, it had carried something emotional, something that felt almost familiar. It was the first time in years that something beyond battle and loss had shaken him. Across the fleet, the soldiers were restless. Repairs to the breaker were still incomplete, and the engineers warned that another firing could destroy the ship. Yet, even damaged, it remained their greatest hope. The Corps had gone silent since the last confrontation, and that silence was worse than open battle. Everyone knew what it meant. They were regrouping, preparing something massive. In the ship's lower levels, the scientist who had first decoded the signal kept working in secret. She had traced the alien code embedded in the transmission and found patterns that matched core design, but altered, twisted in strange ways. It looked as if the message had been rewritten by something non-human, but it wasn't core technology either. It was something older, something hidden beneath the galaxy's long history. When she tried to dig deeper, her terminal flickered and shut down again. A faint pulse of energy ran through the hull, like the heartbeat of something watching. The pilot who had broken formation had not returned. Days passed, and no word came. The last trace of his ship showed him approaching that strange structure in uncharted space. The fleet didn't know what had happened to him, but the coordinates he had followed matched the same ones still haunting their systems. Some began to whisper that he had found the source of the message. Others feared he had been lost to it. Then, without warning, the silence broke. Sensors picked up movement on the outer edges of the system. The core were back, and this time they weren't alone. Massive energy readings filled the radar. Their ships were larger than ever before, strange new designs pulsing with violet light. It was clear now. This was their final move. They hadn't just come to destroy the human fleet. They had come to erase every trace of Earth's defiance. The commander ordered the fleet to prepare for battle. Engines roared, shields flared, and weapons charged. But deep inside, no one felt ready. The odds were worse than ever. The core outnumbered them by hundreds. The humans had only the breaker, and it wasn't even stable. If they fired it again, it might not survive, and neither would they. Still, they took their positions. The stars glowed faintly behind the growing storm of enemy fire. The first wave came fast. Plasma strikes tore across the void, slicing through smaller ships. Explosions rippled like silent thunder. Human vessels scattered, weaving through chaos, returning fire with precision and fury. Every hit they landed felt like defiance itself, but the enemy barely slowed. The core fleet moved like a machine, cold, flawless, unstoppable. In the midst of the battle, the strange signal flared again. It wasn't coming from the fleet this time. It was coming from somewhere ahead, beyond the fight, in the same direction the pilot had vanished. The scientist saw it first. The readings were identical to the breaker's energy signature. Somehow, the weapon's technology and the signal were connected. She rushed to the bridge, shouting for the commander to look at the readings. The coordinates weren't random. They were guiding them toward something powerful enough to shift the balance of the war. The commander hesitated. Every decision he had made so far had been about survival, not faith. But this was different. The core were too strong. The breaker was too unstable. If there was even a chance that the signal was leading them to something that could turn the tide, he had to take it. He gave the order. A portion of the fleet would hold the line, while the flagship and 2 escorts would follow the coordinates. The soldiers didn't question it. They just nodded, rechecked their weapons, and prepared for whatever was waiting. As the breaker's engines fired and the ship turned toward the unknown, the stars seemed to blur. The core fleet followed, sensing movement, launching pursuit ships in waves. But the humans didn't stop. The signal grew stronger, the static in their ears becoming a rhythmic pulse, almost like a voice whispering between the lines of noise. "You are not alone." It was different this time, clearer, louder, almost guiding them forward. The scientist's screen lit up with energy readings that made no sense. The source wasn't just a structure, it was a field, massive and alive, and at its center, something waited. The light ahead wasn't just space distortion, it was a halo, glowing faintly with the same hue as the breaker's core. When the flagship broke through the last stretch of dark space, everyone on board fell silent. Floating before them was the structure the pilot had found, a colossal ring made of metal and light, rotating slowly above a dying star. It looked ancient, scarred by time, but still active. And tethered near it was a single small vessel, human in design. The commander's heart stopped. The transponder code matched one from Earth's first deep space colonization program, a ship that had vanished over a century ago. Somehow it had survived. The message hadn't come from the dead. It had come from their own forgotten past. They approached carefully, weapons offline, shields raised. The smaller vessel wasn't hostile. In fact, it wasn't moving at all. Docking drones latched on, pulling it close to the flagship. The airlock sealed, and a boarding team entered. Inside, the ship was dark and frozen, its corridors coated in frost, its lights flickering weakly. Then they found him, the pilot who had disappeared. He was alive, barely, lying in the control room. But when they tried to reach him, his eyes opened with a look that froze everyone in place. He wasn't the same. His voice was quiet, distant. "They're coming," he whispered. "The core aren't what you think they are." Before they could ask what he meant, the lights across both ships flickered. The ancient ring around the star began to hum, energy surging through its structure. The scientists' instruments went wild. The readings were beyond anything measurable. The breaker's core started reacting, resonating with the same frequency as the ring. It was as if the weapon and the structure were made from the same idea, 2 halves of a single creation. Outside, the core fleet had arrived. Their ships surrounded the ring, their weapons charging. They didn't hesitate. They opened fire, and the void erupted into chaos again. The humans scrambled to defend themselves, returning fire as explosions rippled across the dark. The ancient ring glowed brighter with each blast, absorbing the energy, channeling it into the star below. Then, through the blinding light, the core command ship transmitted something strange. It wasn't a threat this time. It was a plea. A message in broken translation. "You must not activate it. You don't understand what it is." But it was too late. The breaker's core had already synced with the ring. Energy arced between them, bright enough to turn darkness into day. The pilot, barely conscious, whispered again, "It's not a weapon. It's a key." The commander stared through the viewport as the ring's light consumed the sky. Every instinct screamed to shut it down, to flee, to survive. But something deeper held him there. The light kept growing, pulling everything toward its center, and in that moment, every soul aboard the ship understood they had reached the edge of something far greater than war. The void trembled, the stars bent, and time itself seemed to hesitate. The breaker's systems screamed under the strain, the hull beginning to crack, the power levels spiking beyond control. And then, everything stopped. The ring's light froze mid-glow, the stars fell silent, and for one breathless moment the entire galaxy seemed to hold still, waiting for what would come next. For a heartbeat, everything in the galaxy was frozen. The light from the ring hung suspended in space, motionless and silent. Even the stars looked like they had stopped burning. The crew of the flagship stood frozen at their stations, afraid to breathe, afraid to move. The breaker's core had stopped spinning mid-pulse, its glow locked in a strange blue-white shimmer that seemed to bend reality itself. No one knew if time had truly stopped, or if they were caught inside something far beyond their understanding. Then, without warning, everything shifted. The light didn't fade. It folded inward. The stars stretched and twisted, and for a split second, everyone felt weightless. A shock wave of soundless energy rippled through the void, and when it passed, the fleet was no longer where it had been. The core armada was gone. The dying star was gone. Even the familiar constellations had vanished. They were somewhere else entirely. The ship's navigation systems went wild, spinning out meaningless data. Every star outside the viewport was unfamiliar. The ring still floated nearby, but now it glowed faintly red, as if something inside it had changed. The breaker's core was dim but still active, humming quietly. The commander turned toward the scientist, whose face was pale as she tried to process the readings. "This isn't hyperspace," she said in disbelief. "It's another layer. Not space as we know it. More like—" She hesitated, searching for words. "A reflection of it." Before anyone could respond, the comms came alive again. A signal, human, faint, but clear, echoed through the static. It was the same voice as before. "You are not alone." But this time, there was more. "You've opened the gate." The commander's stomach tightened. Gate. The word fit too perfectly with what they were seeing. The ring hadn't just transported them, it had moved them between realities, into some hidden network beyond normal space. But why, and who, or what, had built it? The recovered pilot, still weak but conscious, sat in the medbay, his eyes unfocused. He murmured things that made no sense at first, fragments of images, half-formed words. "The core tried to destroy it," he whispered, "not because they feared us, but because they feared what's on the other side." When asked what that was, he only said one thing before slipping back into silence. "The architects." The name lingered like a shadow. The scientist searched through old data, connecting fragments of lost human archives and intercepted alien records. The core had legends about beings they called the Makers of the Deep, entities that had vanished long before any known empire existed. They were said to have created the first gateways, bridges between realities, before disappearing without trace. The ring they had found matched those ancient descriptions. If that was true, then humanity hadn't just discovered alien technology. They had awakened something older than the galaxy itself. But the more they studied the readings, the clearer it became that the ring wasn't stable. It pulsed erratically, energy building inside it like a heartbeat growing faster. The breaker, still linked to the ring, reacted in kind, its power levels rising uncontrollably. The scientist realized what was happening. The two systems were feeding off each other. If they didn't find a way to separate them, both would collapse, and whatever this strange place was could collapse with them. Before they could act, the ship's sensors detected movement. Shapes were emerging from the red mist that surrounded the ring, huge, silent, and unfamiliar. They weren't core ships. Their designs were wrong, too fluid, too intricate. Their surfaces shimmered like liquid metal. No one knew if they were alive or machines, but they moved with terrifying grace. The crew watched in silence as the first of the unknown vessels approached. It emitted no sound, no signal. The commander ordered weapons charged, but the scientist stopped him. "Wait," she said quietly. "They're not attacking." The ship slowed, surrounding the human fleet but keeping distance. Then one of them opened, a section of its hull peeling back like unfolding glass, and a beam of soft white light projected toward the flagship. A figure stepped through. It wasn't core. It wasn't human. It was something between both, tall, luminous, shifting faintly like its body was made of starlight rather than flesh. Its eyes, or what seemed to be eyes, glowed faintly blue. When it spoke, its voice was layered, almost like several voices speaking at once. "You should not have opened the gate," it said. The commander froze. "Who are you?" The being tilted its head slightly, its expression unreadable. "We are what remains of the architects," it said. "And you have awakened the path we sealed long ago." The scientist stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Why seal it? What's on the other side?" The being's form flickered for a moment, as if the question itself caused disturbance. "Beyond this layer lies the source," it replied. "A creation field. The origin of all energy that flows through this galaxy. When your weapon, your breaker, connected to the ring, it opened a fracture. Now the balance is failing." The commander frowned, trying to make sense of it. "You're saying our weapon caused this, that it's tearing the galaxy apart?" "Not yet," the being said softly, "but it will, unless it is contained." The tension on the bridge thickened. Contained. The word could mean anything, and none of the meanings were good. The being continued, its tone calm but final. "The core tried to destroy you not for conquest, but to prevent this. They feared what humans would do if they found our works. You are reckless with creation. You do not understand restraint." The words struck deep. For years, humanity had fought to survive, to prove they could stand against the galaxy. But now it sounded like they might have unleashed something worse than extinction. Before anyone could respond, alarms blared across the bridge. The core had returned. Through the fractured space, their ships were breaking through the barrier, drawn by the same unstable energy that had pulled the humans in. The void flashed with violet light as their fleet poured into the reflection layer. The moment they arrived, the unknown beings turned sharply, their shimmering forms hardening like armor. The being facing the commander looked back one last time. "It is too late to close the gate, but it may not yet be too late to choose who survives." Then it vanished in a burst of light, returning to its vessel. The commander shouted for battle stations. The fleet erupted into motion once again, but the rules of combat were no longer the same. Energy behaved differently in this strange space. Shields flickered in unpredictable ways, weapons bent mid-flight, and explosions rippled like water. The humans fought alongside the unknown vessels, not allies yet, but sharing the same desperate goal, to stop the core from reaching the ring. The breaker's power surged again, reacting to the chaos. The scientist realized it was drawing from the creation field itself, feeding on it like a living thing. If it reached full capacity, it could ignite everything. The ring, the core, even their own fleet. But turning it off wasn't possible anymore. It was beyond control. Outside, the core's command ship advanced, larger and darker than ever before. A final transmission cut through the noise, the High Marshal's voice sharp and urgent. "Human, listen. The architects are not what they claim. They built the field to feed on life itself. We tried to destroy it, not to save ourselves, but to save all worlds." The words sent a chill through the commander. The Corps' tone wasn't arrogant anymore. It was desperate. Then the ring pulsed one last time, brighter than a star, and every ship, human, Corps, and architect, was caught in its pull. The energy surged, space itself tearing open into a spiral of light and shadow. The fleet began to fall toward it, helpless. The commander grabbed the console, shouting for the crew to brace. The scientist screamed as her instruments overloaded, readings spiking off the charts. In that final instant, before they were consumed by the light, the mysterious voice echoed again through every ship, calm, almost sorrowful. "You are not alone, but you may wish you were." And then the world shattered. The light was everywhere. It wasn't just bright, it was consuming. Every surface, every shadow, every thought felt like it was being rewritten by the pulse of the ring. The human fleet, the Corps ships, and the shimmering vessels of the architects were all drawn into the swirling breach, their engines screaming against a pull that felt more like gravity made of thought than force. The commander could barely see through the haze of white and gold that flooded the bridge. He shouted orders, but no one could hear. The air was thick with vibration, as if the ship itself was caught between being matter and memory. Then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went still. The silence was unbearable, so deep that even the hum of the ship's reactor was gone. When the commander opened his eyes, he wasn't in the reflection layer anymore. The bridge was intact, but the stars outside were gone. Instead, they hung in a void of soft, shifting light. It looked like a sea without color, rippling in slow motion. The ring floated before them, but it was no longer red. It was transparent, like a perfect loop of glass, pulsing faintly in rhythm with their own heartbeats. The scientist whispered, "We're inside it! Inside the gate itself!" Then the comms flared again, but this time it wasn't static or voices. It was memories, flashes of Earth's history, played through sound and light. First fire, then ships leaving orbit, then the wars that drove humanity to the stars. They saw their own progress, their triumphs, their mistakes, all bleeding together in a single living stream. It was as if the ring was showing them what they truly were: creators, destroyers, survivors. The commander felt a lump in his throat. "It's reading us," he said quietly, "or judging us." A sudden pulse shook the ship. The ring split apart into 10 luminous shards that hovered like sentinels. The breaker's core flared, answering the fragments, and for a moment the crew realized the connection ran both ways. The weapon humanity had built wasn't just drawing power, it had become a key. The scientists stared in awe. That's why the architects sealed it. The breaker doesn't destroy, it opens. Before she could finish, another voice broke through the air. Not from comms, but from everywhere at once. It was the same layered tone as before, belonging to the architect they'd met, but now deeper, strained. "You have breached the veil. The field is unstable. You must decide." The commander looked up. "Decide what? To close it, or to ascend?" The crew exchanged confused looks. The scientist's eyes widened as she understood. "The creation field, it's the source of all energy. We could use it to rebuild everything, end war, end scarcity, maybe even death itself." But the architect's voice cut through her words like thunder. At a cost, every world, every life bound to this field would fade into it. You would become its next guardians, its next prisoners. The realization hit hard. If they closed the gate, they'd save the galaxy. If they took its power, they'd end up like the architects, immortal, but trapped in the void forever. The commander turned to his crew. Their faces showed exhaustion, fear, and something more: hope. Humanity had fought so long to survive the cruelty of the stars. Now, survival meant choosing between self-sacrifice and godhood. Before he could answer, the Corps flagship appeared out of the void, drifting toward them. Its hull was fractured, its weapons offline, but it still burned with defiance. A transmission came through, visual this time. The High Marshal appeared, his armor cracked, his face weary. "Human," he said, his tone no longer cruel. "You see now what we feared. The architects offered us this once. We refused. We chose to remain mortal." The commander stared back at him. "You tried to destroy us. I tried to stop this," the marshal replied. "But perhaps it was meant to be you. Your kind has a way of pushing further than anyone else." His voice softened. "If you close the gate, we will stand with you. One last time." The void trembled again. The shards around the ring began to spin faster, merging their light. The scientists' monitors lit up in panic. "The breaker's charge is rising. If we don't act, it'll ignite everything." The commander took a breath. "Can we reverse it?" "Yes," she said quickly, "but it'll need a manual override from the core chamber." He nodded, already standing. The ship shuddered under his feet as he made his way down, passing crew members clutching rails and whispering prayers. The closer he got to the breaker, the louder it hummed, like a heartbeat that wasn't his. When he reached the chamber, the sight took his breath away. The core was floating mid-air, wrapped in tendrils of blue-white energy. It pulsed with images of stars, planets, even human faces, millions of them. He approached the console, trembling. One command could shut it down, but it would also trap them inside the ring forever. He hesitated, thinking of Earth, of the families still waiting, of what kind of legacy humanity would leave behind. Then he heard her voice again, the scientist, faint through comms. "Whatever you choose, make sure it's for them, not for us." He looked at the light one last time and pressed the command. The breaker roared, flooding the chamber with a brilliance that cut through every shadow. Outside, the shards merged back into the ring, sealing it shut in a burst of pure energy. The human ship and the core flagship were thrown back, tumbling through the collapsing field as everything folded inward. The void screamed, then went silent. When the light faded, the fleet was back in real space. Stars glittered once more, and the ring was gone. The breaker's core was dark, cold, and lifeless. The scientist sat at her console, staring at the readings in disbelief. "We did it," she whispered. "It's closed." The commander looked out at the stars. The core ship drifted nearby, its weapons lowered. A quiet transmission came through, just 4 words from the High Marshal. "You kept the balance." Then the alien fleet turned away, disappearing into the black. The humans sat in silence, the weight of what they'd seen settling over them. The breaker, the weapon that had begun as a symbol of defiance, was now a monument to restraint. They hadn't conquered the galaxy. They had saved it. But just as the tension began to fade, one final signal appeared on the sensors. A faint pulse, rhythmic and familiar. The scientist frowned. "That can't be right. It's the breaker's signature, but the core's offline." The commander stared at the display. The signal wasn't coming from their ship. It was coming from deep within space, far beyond any known system. The pulse repeated, steady and deliberate. Then the message appeared on the screen in simple, ancient human code. Humanity built 10 that worked. 1 remains. The bridge went silent. The commander's heart pounded as he realized what it meant. The breaker they had used wasn't the first. It was just 1 of 10. Somewhere out there, 9 more existed. The scientist looked up slowly, her face pale. If one reactivated, someone else found another gate. No one spoke after that. The stars outside looked different now. Beautiful, yes, but full of quiet danger. The commander turned off the display, his reflection staring back at him in the dark glass. "Then it begins again," he murmured. And somewhere, far beyond human reach, another ring stirred in the shadows, its surface glowing faintly as a new hum filled the void. Humanity had sealed one gate. but the galaxy still held 9 more. The silence that followed was almost unreal. After everything, the battles, the collapsing realities, the impossible choices, there was finally calm. The stars outside were steady again, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the ship didn't tremble under the weight of cosmic forces. The commander stood on the bridge, staring at the empty space where the ring once hung. It was gone now, sealed beyond reach, but its absence felt heavy, like a wound in the sky that would never fully heal. The scientist sat quietly at her console, fingers still trembling over the faded readings. "It's stable," she said finally, breaking the silence. "The field's gone. No residual energy, no gravitational distortion. It's really over." Her voice carried a mix of relief and exhaustion, the kind that came only after realizing you had survived something you weren't supposed to. The commander nodded slowly. "Then we go home," he said. But the word home felt strange now. None of them were the same people who had left Earth. They had seen things that defied reason, crossed into places where time and reality bent around thought. They had faced not just their enemies, but the very question of what humanity was meant to be, destroyers or protectors, conquerors or caretakers. The crew moved quietly around the bridge, beginning the long sequence to align the ship for the jump back to known space. The engines hummed softly, their familiar vibration a strange comfort. The commander looked out again at the stars and thought about the core fleet. Their ships had vanished into the dark, silent but not defeated. He knew somehow that the war between them was over. Maybe not by treaty or words, but by something greater. Understanding. The scientist turned in her chair and looked at him. "Do you think they'll tell the truth?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll keep their legends about us. The species that built weapons strong enough to shake the galaxy, but chose to stop using them." He paused, his eyes distant. "Sometimes that's how peace starts. Not with trust, but with a story." Hours passed as the ship prepared for the journey home. In the mess hall, the remaining crew sat together, sharing quiet laughter over weak coffee and old memories. There were empty chairs among them, too many, but no one spoke about those who hadn't made it back. They all knew what it had cost to survive. Later, the scientist joined the commander by the viewport. The stars ahead shimmered faintly as the engines warmed. "You never told me what you saw when the breaker activated," she said softly. He hesitated, then answered, "Everything. Not just light or sound, but meaning. It showed us what we could become, both the best and the worst. For a second, I understood why the architects sealed it away. Power like that doesn't belong to anyone. Not to them, not to us." She nodded slowly. "And yet, we built it." "Yeah," he said, half smiling. "We always build things we're not ready for. That's what makes us human." The ship's systems came online one by one, each green light marking a small victory. As the jump drive powered up, the scientist's console blinked, a final set of coordinates appearing automatically. She frowned. "That's odd. I didn't enter a destination." The commander leaned over her shoulder, reading the display. The coordinates pointed toward Earth. Not the exact system they'd left, but close, just a few light years off. "Maybe the ship remembers where it came from better than we do," he said quietly. The engines flared, and with a deep rumble, the fleet entered the jump. The stars stretched into ribbons of light, and for a moment, it felt like falling through a dream. When they emerged, a familiar blue glow filled the viewport. Earth. Home. The crew erupted in quiet cheers, some of them crying openly. The planet looked peaceful from here, unaware of the storm that had raged light years away. The commander stood still, just watching it turn. The oceans shimmered like silver, and the cities were dots of gold against the night side. "We made it," the scientist whispered beside him. but the commander's eyes drifted to the distant void beyond their system, where countless stars burned in the dark. "For now," he said softly. Days later, after the debriefings and the silence, the reports spread across the colonies. Humanity had survived the impossible. The Breaker Project was officially dismantled. Its core was sealed and buried deep beneath the lunar surface, locked under endless layers of protection. No one outside the surviving fleet knew the full truth about what had happened beyond the stars. Officially, the mission had ended in success, a strategic victory, a new peace with the core. But among the crew, the unspoken truth remained. They hadn't won a war. They had closed a door. Still, questions lingered. The faint signal they'd received, "One remains," haunted them. The scientist spent her final months on the fleet studying every trace of data, trying to locate where the message had come from. It never repeated, but every few weeks, her instruments picked up tiny fluctuations in deep space energy patterns. It was as if something out there was breathing, slowly, patiently. One evening, while she stood watching the stars from the observation deck, the commander joined her. They didn't speak for a while. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. Finally, she said, "Do you think it's true? That one still exists?" He didn't answer right away. "Maybe," he said finally, "but maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's a reminder of what we're capable of and what we have to protect." She smiled faintly. "You sound almost hopeful." "Hope's dangerous," he said, looking at the stars. "But it's what keeps us building even after everything." As months passed, humanity began to change. The fleets were repurposed for exploration instead of war. The core sent emissaries, cautious but curious. Trade began where once there had been conflict. The old fear slowly faded into something new, respect. The legend of the 10 breakers spread across both species, retold in different ways. Some called them weapons of light, others called them doors to creation. But among the people who knew the truth, they became something else entirely, a lesson written in starlight. Years later, when the commander finally retired, he returned to a quiet home on Earth's coast. He spent his days watching the horizon, the endless blue reminding him of space. One night, while sitting alone under the open sky, he noticed a faint pulse on his old wrist display. It was weak, almost hidden, but unmistakable. The same rhythm, the same signal. He smiled to himself, feeling a strange calm settle over him. Maybe it was a glitch, or maybe it was something else. A sign that somewhere, out in the dark, the story wasn't quite finished. Humanity had survived, yes, but survival was never the end of the story. It was just another beginning. He turned off the display and looked back at the stars, their reflection shimmering on the quiet sea. "We built 10 that worked," he whispered. "Maybe one day we'll be ready for what they really meant." The wind moved softly, carrying the sound of the waves. The stars overhead burned steady, eternal, and though the universe remained vast and unknowable, for the first time in human history, it didn't feel hostile anymore. It felt alive, waiting. And somewhere, far beyond sight, in the depths of the silent void, a ring of light flickered once, then vanished into the dark, leaving behind only the faint echo of a heartbeat, steady, human, and unbroken.